Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving into the 19th century Punjab police force and how it evolved through an absolute game of whack-a-mole with increasingly clever criminals. It's an incredibly fascinating look at how society has to adapt when the rules of the game just keep changing, forcing law enforcement to literally reinvent itself on the fly. But to understand where we're going, we really have to start with the absolute chaos of the 1857 mutiny. It was a wildly turbulent time perfectly captured by this historical observation from our source material: violent remedies suit only violent maladies. And during this period, massive, heavily militarized police levies were organized out of pure dire necessity. Just to hold the province together and maintain order. So here's our agenda for today's journey. We'll be moving from chaos to constabulary, tracking bad characters, policing the violent frontier, river patrols and cattle rustlers, and finally, the railway crime wave. Let's get right into it. Section 1. Chaos to constabulary, from military might to civil order. Because as soon as peace returned, financial reality hit hard, and it forced a massive shift in how society was policed. Now, the contrast here is pretty stark. On one side, you've got the military police of 1857, heavy, incredibly expensive, and focused entirely on mutiny suppression. But right next to it is the civil constabulary of 1861, streamlined, cost-effective, and organized for actual civil society. The government simply couldn't afford that earlier wartime extravagance anymore, so, they had to get smart. And what's wild is how fast this 19th century bureaucracy moved. Look at this. In just over a year, from Forsyth's initial reform scheme in 1860, through the Calcutta Commission draft bill, to the actual enforcement of Police Act V in 1861, they completely transformed the entire province's police force. And here is the so what of it all, the financial impact. This rapid shift from a heavy military force to a streamlined civil one saved the government a staggering 17.5 lakhs of rupees in 1861 alone. To put that in perspective, that is a massive return on bureaucratic efficiency for the time. Moving on to Section 2, tracking bad characters. Bureaucracy meets the underworld. With the military footing gone, this new civil force needed serious administrative tools to handle a shifting criminal underworld. And this brings us to a classic case of solving one problem only to create another. The highly specialized thuggee establishment was actually abolished in 1862. Why? Well, they were literally too successful. The specific crime of thuggee became incredibly rare, so keeping these highly paid specialists around was reducing general efficiency and burning through funds. Ultimately, their duties were just transferred over to the regular police. But, of course, the authorities still had to keep a very close eye on local miscreants, so they implemented the 1861 Register of Bad Characters. This was a meticulous paper trail to record the full identity, antecedents, and movements of convicted offenders. It was essentially the birth of modern, data-driven surveillance for that era. Now, down at the local village level, indigenous systems were formalized to feed into this whole network. Enter the village watchmen. They were officially appointed and outfitted in a blue uniform, carrying, get this, a spear and a sword. Their main job was to report these bad characters and any local crimes straight to the district magistrate. It was a really clever way to weave local eyes and ears into a larger provincial system. Which brings us to Section 3, policing the violent frontier, the trans-Indus challenges. While the central cities were stabilizing with paperwork and watchmen, the extreme, volatile trans-Indus border was a totally different beast. If you look at this data, reconstructed from the source, the financial burden of maintaining the frontier military police was just immense. You'll notice a massive reliance on mounted horsemen compared to foot soldiers. Maintaining those 403 horses alone drove the cost up to nearly 1.1 lakhs per year, out of a total 1.29 lakhs. It was an incredibly expensive operation. And historical accounts prove this wasn't an exaggeration. The frontier police faced an unbelievable web of violent, deeply ingrained local circumstances. Standard civil policing rules just went out the window here. Look at these specific drivers of crime. There was absolutely no prohibition against owning arms. You had vicious hereditary blood feuds, a remarkably low value set upon human life, and inviolable asylums right across the border, where criminals could just vanish. These factors demanded a completely different, almost militarized approach. Let's be real. A village watchman with a spear wasn't going to solve a hereditary blood feud. Okay, let's shift gears and environments for Section 4. River patrols and cattle rustlers, catching thieves on the water. Because the landscape itself really dictated the policing methods here. On the rivers, the primary threat wasn't your typical street crime. It was a massive, highly organized system of cattle lifting. These inventive criminals would use the fast-moving rivers as their getaway routes, literally swimming stolen cattle downstream to evade capture. So how do you combat that? Well, the police came up with the Saka Chowkadari system. Step 1, build a machan, which is a temporary hut up in the branches of a tree about 10 feet above the water. Step 2, spot the swimming thieves from your elevated hideouts. And step 3, this is the best part. You pursue the thieves by water using an inflated animal skin. Seriously, imagine a 19th century officer floating down a river on a ballooned-out animal skin to catch a cattle rustler. Absolutely brilliant and totally practical for the time. And finally, Section 5, the railway crime wave, high-speed crime. As technology advanced, the criminals adapted right along with it, bringing us to the era of the high-speed railways. This historical quote perfectly captures the authorities' sheer frustration as the 1869 railway expansion gave criminals a rapid transit system. They complained that it opened the way for criminals to fly away like bees after sucking honey from a garden. What a vivid way to describe a modern crime wave, right? This quick locomotion provided a massive impetus to crime. Suddenly, the escape of offenders was incredibly easy across the entire province, which basically rendered traditional, localized policing methods totally obsolete overnight. A whole new wave of bizarre crimes sprang up. We're talking running train burglaries, rampant fraud, oppressive railway employees taking advantage of passengers, and chaotic crowds at booking offices threatening the peace. The unprotected stations and goods sheds were just completely overwhelmed by this new criminal frontier. At first, the railway companies tried using private watchmen, but these early guards were totally untrained, lacked legal authority, and practically couldn't arrest anyone. It was a mess. So in 1868, the government was forced to step in and officially form the Government Railway Police, just to get things under control. Over time, it became obvious that keeping all these highly specialized branches separate, the city, frontier, river, and rail forces, was super inefficient. Criminals were crossing jurisdictions constantly, so they were eventually forced to amalgamate into one unified provincial force to combat these escalating, interconnected threats. So, as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with this final thought. The technology of crime evolved from horseback to railways back then. How do you think modern policing is adapting to the digital railways of today? It's a game of whack-a-mole that honestly never truly ends. Thanks so much for exploring this fascinating slice of history with me.